Copy, you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
1, 0, 0,
Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery rocket, go for deploy.
Thanks to you and to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good morning and welcome back to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I'm NASA's Shaniqua Vereen, and you are watching live mission coverage for the NASA SpaceX Crew-4 mission. Today we are returning for astronauts home after a 6-month science mission aboard the International Space Station.
Houston Station on 2.
With you on 2, Josh.
Yeah, as you probably already heard, sounded like there is no fire there in the Russian segment. We've got zeros on our CSACPs here in node 2. So if you agree, I think we're stepping back into the Dragon procedures. Do you?
We don't need to. Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Josh.
Go ahead on 2.
Yep, thank you again for that report. We're waiting on our colleagues in the Russian segment to give us the CP readings there. Other than that, we will let you know when we are continuing.
Okay, copy that. We will stand by on resuming the Dragon now.
Good read.
Again, you're watching live mission coverage of NASA SpaceX Crew-4 mission, returning 4 astronauts home from a 6-month stay aboard the International Space Station. Mission control teams here and at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, have delayed today's undocking time, moving it to the right about 30 minutes. We're looking at 11:05 a.m. Central Time for an undocking, the middle of a 1-hour undocking window to allow crew on the International Space Station to check the hatch alignment on the ISS side of the docking interface. Crews are proceeding now with vestibule depressurization and moving along towards that 11:05 a.m. Central Time undocking. Today's undocking is autonomous, but will be monitored by ground controllers here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room and in Hawthorne, California. Teams are being led here by Flight Director Adi Boulos.
Station Houston on the big loop, letting you know that we did get confirmation that this was a false fire, and we are continuing on the undock procedures.
Copy, thanks. Good news.
Station copies, and we are in step 3.1 of U.S. hatch seal inspection.
Currently getting a live view inside of SpaceX Dragon Freedom attached to the space-facing port of the Harmony module. Dragon is returning to Earth later today, expected still at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, returning a crew of 4 along with hundreds of pounds of return cargo. We're looking for Dragon to depart the station again. That's 11:05 a.m. Central Time. Upon undocking, Dragon will have a small set of firings or burns to push it away from the station. Again, we're looking for a deorbit burn to come a few hours later. Looking at around a 3 o'clock deorbit burn for a 3:55 p.m. Central Time splashdown off the coast of Florida, and that's Jacksonville, Florida.
Houston Station on 2 for hatch seal inspection. The Node 2 Zenith hatch seal is complete and no anomalies.
Houston copies.
There are a couple milestones we'll see Dragon meet this morning. First, those departure burns, but then it will cross the keep out sphere, an invisible line around the station with a 200-meter radius. It will keep heading away from the station and will stand by until it makes its way out of the approach ellipsoid, another invisible line considered the neighborhood of the station. These invisible lines are where we have checkpoints for the vehicle on the way to and from the station. Once that command to undock is sent, we will be looking for 2 sets of 6 hooks from the International Space Station to be released from Dragon Freedom. After open, 2 small undocking burns that will last less than 2 seconds, and we'll begin to see separation of the vehicle. The spacecraft will start to slowly drift away. Next, Dragon will have a few departure burns to get it into the proper position away from station for its eventual deorbit burn, scheduled later today at 3:01 p.m. Central Time. That will slow Dragon down enough to drop it out of orbit and send it towards its landing zone, splashing down at approximately 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern.
Houston Station on 2, those PMA 3 closeout photos are on SSC 17.
Copy.
If you're just joining us, the Crew Dragon Freedom, along with Crew-4, is ready to depart the space station, having arrived on April 27th. The crew consists of NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and ESA astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop for timeline impacts and return to Earth plan. Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop for timeline impacts and return to Earth plan.
We're on the big loop.
Hey, Chell, we've got some time to talk here, so I want to walk through the plan for the next few hours and give you a chance to ask any questions you might have. First, we expect about 20 minutes remaining here on the vestibule leak check, complete around 1550. After that, we have some final vehicle reconfigurations prior to undock and are targeting 1600 for undock sequence start. How copy?
$1,600 for undock sequence start.
Good copy. Some more words. After we undock, we are targeting Jacksonville as primary with Tallahassee as an alternate 24 hours later. And to get down to Jacksonville, we've got depart burns 1, 2, and 3, 1 prop waste burn, and then the deorbit burn. Expect all the events on your timeline through depart burn 3 to shift 30 minutes, but the prop waste burn and deorbit burn timing is accurate. How copy?
We copy all.
Continuing, latest forecast in Jacksonville shows winds averaging below 7 knots, shallow waves, no rain, great weather to land. Our recovery vessel Megan is on site, not tracking any issues. They're ready to get you out of the water. And I just got word from Rick on the boat. He said, see you soon.
Copy, good looking weather. Megan is on station and has no issues, and we are looking forward to seeing where there's snow and things.
And a few more words on timeline. After we undock, it's a bit of an expedited timeline to Splashdown. You're out of suits for less than 2 hours. I'm going to leave it up to y'all to manage suit stowage as appropriate. We're going to plan a PMC after depart burn 2, and I'll leave it up to you to take it or waive it at that time. How copy so far?
Copy, it's going to have shorter time out of suits. We'll manage the suit stowage and schedule PNC after depart burn 2.
Good copy. Continuing, manual control of cabin temperature is not going to work through 4.080 as we start to cool the vehicle prior to deorbit. And as a final note, I'm going to have you step into 4.700 now to get a head start on cabin configuration for the deorbit sequence. I've got 2 notes on that procedure. The first is that pre-chill is not necessary in Section 1. Essentially skip that section. Second note, floater cam inspection not necessary in Section 4. So similarly to suits, we'll be looking to you to manage cargo and have the cabin configured for entry prior to suit leak checks at 18:55. How copy?
Copy, we're skipping pre-chill and then step. We will not be getting the floater camera out, but we will be managing stowage and cargo prior to 18:55.
Good copy on all. And now a question for you. Do you have any questions for the team down here in Hawthorne?
I would like to know what the froyo of the day is.
And Freedom, we've got vanilla and orange guava sorbet here. I don't expect you'll make it here this week, but we'll see you soon here in Hawthorne.
Great. Sure appreciate it. We don't have any other questions. We're looking forward to seeing folks on the Mega.
Copy all, Freedom. We're looking forward to seeing you as well, and I'll be back with you shortly on vestibule leak check status.
And with that, Houston Station on 2, we've got the Node 2 overhead hatch and MPEV closed, and you've already got the SSC-17 for those downlink photos.
Copy.
And you just heard a message from Jake Vendel, the core and SpaceX Mission Control, the Crew Operations Resource Engineer, reporting to Dragon Commander Kjell Lindgren that they do have a 30-minute delay in today's undocking time. Again, we're moving that to the right to 11:05 a.m. Central Time, the middle of a 1-hour undocking window, and this allowed the crew on the ISS time to check the hatch alignment on the ISS side of the docking interface. Crews are currently in vestibule leak check, and we're waiting to see that moves forward nominally. NASA and SpaceX are still targeting a 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Wrapping up nearly 6-month science mission for NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and ESA astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti.
Station Tsukuba, Space Ground 2 for call 1. When you have a chance, give us a call on Space Ground 3.
Taking another live look at the SpaceX Dragon Freedom attached to the space-facing port of the Harmony module. Dragon is returning to Earth later today, expected at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, with about 500 pounds of research and return cargo, along with the Crew-4 crew members. About 4 hours after Dragon departs from the station, it will conduct a deorbit burn, which will last about 16 minutes and 40 seconds. It'll then take about 30 minutes for Dragon to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere for its parachute-assisted splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Again, we're expecting that splashdown at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern. There are a couple milestones we'll see Dragon meet this morning. First, those departure burns, but then it will cross the keep-out sphere, an invisible line around the station with a 200-meter radius. It will keep heading away from the station and will stand by until it makes its way out of the approach ellipsoid, another invisible line considered the neighborhood of the station. These invisible lines are where we have checkpoints for the vehicle on the way to and from the station. Once that command to undock is sent, we will be looking for 2 sets of 6 hooks from the International Space Station to be released from Dragon Freedom. After open, 2 small undocking burns that will last less than 2 seconds, and we'll see separation of the vehicle from the International Space Station. The spacecraft will start to slowly drift away. Next, we'll have a few departure burns to get it into the proper position away from the station for its eventual deorbit. And we're looking for deorbit burn to be around 3:01 p.m. Central Time. That will slow Dragon down enough to drop it out of orbit and send it toward the landing zone, splashing down at approximately 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida.
Houston in Munich on Spacecraft 2 for the timeline.
Houston's here on 2.
Okay, I'm going to go to Spacecraft 3 for the timeline discussion.
If you're just joining us, you're looking live inside of Dragon Freedom, where the Crew-4 astronauts are preparing for undocking today, returning after a 6-month science mission aboard the International Space Station. NASA and SpaceX are targeting an 11:05 a.m. Central Time undocking from the International Space Station, with a splashdown time of 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time, Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. We'll be providing continuous coverage through Splashdown and Crew Egress later today. In just a few minutes, our colleagues at Mission Control X, or SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, will be joining the broadcast and giving us some updates on what's been happening there. Dragon and the International Space Station are currently flying 259 statute miles above the Pacific Ocean off the coast of the United States. Again, we should see and hear from our colleagues joining the broadcast from MCCX, SpaceX's Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, just here shortly.
You're looking at a live view of the Dragon Freedom spacecraft as we await its departure from the International Space Station on its way back to planet Earth. It's Friday, October 14th here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Now, we expect Dragon to push away from the space station at 9:05 a.m. Pacific or 16:05 GMT. And that will be with our Crew-4 astronauts, including Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. The crew is currently suited up and inside Dragon, and the station hatches are all sealed in preparation for departure. Thanks for tuning in to watch live coverage of Crew Dragon completing its 4th official long-duration mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program. My name is Kate Tice, and I'm the Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Sandra Jones. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's great to be here. So once Dragon departs station, the crew's flight home is expected to last around 5 hours. Upon separation from station, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location.
Next on its trip home is Deorbit, entry, and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the Drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown, which will be off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Chell, Bob, Jessica, and Samantha. Later today, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida at 1:55 p.m. Pacific, and that's today, October 13th, or 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, and followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of the SpaceX recovery vessels.
That's right, Kate. And today on board the International Space Station is the Expedition 68 crew. They're currently being led by Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev, who just took over as station commander from Samantha Cristoforetti, who is coming home today on Crew-4. And as a reminder, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Nicole Mann helped the crew members prepare for departure earlier today and will be watching from the cupola. But the prime departure monitoring role falls on Kjell Lindgren and Bob Hines from inside Dragon. Mission controls in Houston and Hawthorne will back them up. So let's head over to Shaniqua Vereen at the Johnson Space Center to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send the crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs from station. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Sandra, and welcome back to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. The flight control team is primed and ready for this morning's undocking operations. Today's Orbit 2 team is being led by NASA Flight Director Adi Boulos. Since Crew-5's arrival just last week, it's been a busy week during our direct handover. Over the last several days, the astronauts worked to pack Dragon full of cargo for their return journey home. Along with the crew, Dragon will return hundreds of pounds of cargo back to Earth. The cargo inside includes some samples from continuing human research and some hardware and other items. All of the cargo will be offloaded after we get the crew out following splashdown, and the scientific samples will then be sent to researchers for final analysis. The crew also took time to get their SpaceX suits unpacked and ready for their journey home. Since getting the hatches closed around 9:20 a.m. Central Time, all 4 astronauts are now suited up and in their seats and standing by for undocking. We'll continue through to a final go, no-go poll coming up in just a few minutes, where the joint SpaceX and NASA teams make their final call for Dragon to depart station. This is one of many checkpoints in the return that will continue all the way until just before the deorbit burn, giving mission managers multiple chances to assess the weather at the splashdown zones and making sure everything is lining up before Dragon departs. So we'll stand by for the final go, no-go, but for now, everything's continuing to look good here. And on-time departure of 11:05 a.m. Central Time. With that, I'll throw it back over to you guys. Over to you, Kate and Sandra.
Thanks, Shaniqua. All good news to hear. Now, separation is set for approximately 9:05 a.m. Pacific or 16:05 GMT, which is just a couple minutes from now. At the moment, Dragon, which you see there on your screen, is in its final configuration before undocking, and we are waiting for mission operators to conduct their go, no-go poll on whether to move forward with the undocking procedure.
And just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board, which is even easier this time around since the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints like when we see a vehicle arrive.
Now, once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure.
Station Houston on Space to Ground 2 for exercise.
All right, see ya.
Go for exercise on 2.
Yeah, until we complete undock, ARED, we have a constraint on ARED exercise. So can you let Sergey know he is no-go on ARED, and actually it's all exercise?
No exercise until undock complete. Thank you.
Now, once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco engines, which you see a couple of those thruster ports there on your screen. It'll use those Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory back to Earth.
And next on its trip is
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. Vestibule leak check nominal, and we're going to step into residual depress imminently.
And continuing to step through those procedures ahead of undocking today, hearing everything continues to move smoothly. So next on its trip home, following what Kate just discussed, is Deorbit, entry and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. So that includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the Drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover the Crew-4 astronauts inside Crew Dragon from the water.
It's always super exciting to follow along. Now, we are expecting that go, no-go poll to occur in about 2 minutes or so. Again, that is basically the last poll for the mission operators to basically make sure that everything, both on board Dragon and on board station, to everybody to confirm between here in Mission Control and Hawthorne, as well as Mission Control over at NASA and at Johnson Space Center, basically for all teams to make sure that everybody is thumbs up for undocking from the International Space Station. And there's our first live look, actually, inside the capsule with our Crew-4 astronauts there. As you can see, they're all buckled in, their suits are on, and everyone looks pretty comfy to me.
Yep, absolutely. And the crew will remain in these suits during the dynamic phase of the mission. So once they are undocked successfully and a little bit away from the space station, they will be able to take those suits off. But we are targeting a pretty short phasing from undocking to splashdown. So we heard a call earlier that they're only going to be out of their suits for about 2 hours or so, and then they'll put them back on, get suited, and get ready for re-entry and splashdown.
Yeah, now while they have their suits on, they are, and as in their seats, as we see here, they are plugged in to the umbilical, which is basically the connection point between the suit and the seat, and therefore the spacecraft as a whole. So as they're sitting here, they're able to be connected like with electronics, avionics, so those communication systems that we will hear as they speak back and forth to core here at SpaceX Mission Control. But also they have fresh air being flowed through the suit, so I don't have to worry about them really being uncomfortable because they have cool nitrox or nitrogen oxygen mixture being pumped through the suit to help regulate their body temperature and keep them comfy.
And speaking of umbilicals, there's some other umbilicals that are going to come into play here in just a few minutes when we do have the undocking sequence that begins. There's umbilicals that will retract, and those are providing the power right now for Dragon. Once it does depart from the space station, Dragon will receive power from the solar cells on Dragon, which you may have seen when we had the view of Dragon, which is, of course, currently docked, but won't be for very long. We have the go, no-go poll coming up in just a couple of minutes from now, and if all goes well, then we'll undock just a short time from now also.
I would imagine at this point in time, this crew has been on station for months, right? I bet they're excited to come home and see their families, but I would also imagine that this moment might be a little bittersweet, Sandra. Like their home away from home is on station, and here they are buckled in and, only hours away from splashing down at this point. So I could imagine that there is excitement, but also a little bit of sadness that their journey in space is coming to end, at least for now.
Yeah, I'm sure. They've been on station for 170 days, actually, which is just shy of 6 months. They arrived on April 27th. So the crew has actually completed over 2,720 orbits of Earth during their time on station, and has traveled over 72 million miles cumulative, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I'm sure you're right. I bet there is some bittersweetness to it. Excited to see your family, but sad to be leaving this environment.
On the big loop, final reconfigurations for Undock are complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for undock sequence start at 1600 and separation at 1605. Confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure.
And SpaceX Freedom copies pull the go for undock. Our visors are all secured closed, and we are ready for undock.
Copy all.
So we did just hear the confirmation that Dragon has the go to undock. So we are now waiting for that undocking sequence to begin. It should start in just about 2 minutes from now. And once that sequence does begin, it will take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station. It's home for nearly 6 months.
Now, the first step in that automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract, as Sandra mentioned earlier. These umbilicals connect Dragon systems to the space station, which transfer power, telemetry, and commands between the two vehicles throughout Dragon's stay. And once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All of that combined will take roughly 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and begin to move itself further and further away using its Draco thrusters.
And Dragon's initial departure from station is a little different than other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will execute 2 short thruster firings to undock using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule, with the first breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. So we're expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin in just moments from now.
SpaceX on the big loop, undock sequence commanded.
And there you heard it.
Perfect timing, Sandra. So live view there of the Dragon capsule. As we were talking a little bit before, those are the solar panels that you see there on the trunk portion of Dragon. We will, of course, be separating.
Freedom to SpaceX, umbilical demate, complete and nominal.
Good news there. It sounds like we got confirmation that those umbilicals that we were just talking about that help connect the station to Dragon while it's on board have nominally disconnected.
And so as we said, it will be less than 5 minutes from the point that sequence was sent, which was at 9 a.m. So about 4 minutes from now, we should be able to see some of the first movement as Dragon slowly backs away from the space station.
So as I was mentioning before, the black portion that's there, that is the trunk. We will be separating that from the Dragon capsule. The small silver line that you see at the bottom part of the Dragon capsule itself, that's the heat shield, which of course is necessary to reveal in order for them to make atmospheric reentry. So we will be, after Dragon moves away from station, we will be separating. But I love this view that we have because it's such a gorgeous view of those solar panels, which we make here in-house, as well as the trunk itself. So I love that we're able to see that configuration basically in its last time before it deorbits and eventually, burns up in the atmosphere.
So with Dragon now getting ready to undock, let's check in with Shaniqua Vereen in Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center.
Thanks, Sandra. And we do have that confirmation of umbilical has retracted and the command for undock has been sent. Next up, we'll be looking for umbilical retraction and look for 2 sets of 6 hooks to open. That will take just a couple of minutes. And we have a first set of those hooks open. And the second set are moving. That's 6 hooks open, and we're working on the next 6, a total of 12 hooks in all that will be open today.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, all hooks open.
Copy. We see the burns.
And Dragon separation confirmed.
Copy. Thank you.
All 12 hooks now open. Hooks all open and release confirmed at 11:05 a.m. Central Time, while Dragon and the International Space Station flew 259 statute miles above the North Atlantic Ocean.
Freedom Station on the big loop.
Station.
We're sad to see you go. We wish you Godspeed, safe re-entry and landing, and calm seas. We're going to miss you guys. We're thankful for your mentorship. Enjoy your time with your families.
For the good work station. It was an absolute pleasure and privilege to serve on the space station these past 6 months, and a joy to get to work with you all for the past couple of weeks. We know that you're going to continue to do amazing things on station. We look forward to seeing you back home as well.
And those were words from the crew on the ISS to the crew inside Dragon Freedom, giving them farewells as they head on their journey back to home on Earth.
And Freedom SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 0 was nominal.
Copy.
For astronauts, time aboard the orbital outpost is complete following a 6-month science and research mission. Undocking occurred at 11:05 a.m. Central Time, 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time, while the International Space Station was flying over the North Atlantic Ocean. Next up will be a series of departure burns to push Dragon further from the space station. To take us through those burns, I will turn it back over to Hawthorne. Sandra?
Thanks, Shaniqua. I just want to point out that awesome view that we had moments ago. There it is. That is a view from Dragon as it leaves the International Space Station. So it's incredible that it was just there moments ago and it's moving already as we can see further and further away.
And they were docked to the Node 2 Zenith port, or space-facing port. And you did see a little bit of those thruster firings take place already. That was for burn 0, which we did hear was nominal. Lasted just a couple of seconds long, but that little bit was enough to push it away from the space station. And we are now awaiting departure burn 1.
So there's a live view inside Dragon Freedom. On the right-hand side would be pilot Bob Hines, and on the left-hand side would be Commander Kjell Lindgren.
And they'll continue to monitor on the screens inside of Crew Dragon Freedom as they continue the journey back home. But we are hearing that everything is proceeding as expected. We are targeting that departure burn 1 about 2 minutes from now.
Departure burn 1 will increase that initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station. At this point in time, we are utilizing the Draco thrusters, which are on board Dragon. This departure burn, we're expecting it to last about 21 seconds. At this point, Dragon is steering itself. The approach and undocking, basically getting to station and leaving it, everything is autonomous. However, the crew is able to take over at any point in time if necessary. But as you can see right there, they're able to follow along with everything happening with the capsule and their progress for their departure there on those screens that we saw moments ago.
Yeah, exactly right. And during docking, when we have a vehicle that's approaching space station, it can take a little bit longer because we have these hold points that we wait at for safety purposes and precautions, but during undocking, it can happen a lot quicker, and you really saw that. They just undocked a few minutes ago, and now they're already backing away. We're moving into the next departure burn, which we should hear the call out that it has begun any second now. And again, you said this is a pretty short burn, will only last about 20 seconds or so.
So standing by for the call that departure burn 1 has begun. Again, departure burn 1 will last for about 20 seconds.
And we are hearing that the burn is underway. So this burn is going to increase the initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station. And as you mentioned, Kate, that this burn utilizes the service section Dracos.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 1 nominal. At this time, you are go to dock suits per procedure 4.012 if desired. If you do take the suits off and stow them, we ask that you stow with visors closed. And finally, a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Freedom copies, we are good to dock suits. When we stow them, we'll stow them with visors closed. And we will come off the big loop as we exit the ellipsoid.
Good copy.
And we did hear confirmation that that departure burn 1 is complete and went perfectly as expected. It lasted 21 seconds and used those service section Dracos. We also heard some words from the ground up to the crew letting them know that they have the option to take off their spacesuits if they would like. They don't have to though, but if they would care to do so, they're able to do so now at this point. Dragon is already about 175 meters away from the space station, and so the next major milestone that we're looking for is when Dragon exits the keep out sphere. That's that imaginary sphere or boundary 200 meters in radius around the space station, and it is one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft either arriving or departing the space station. But before moving into the keep out sphere, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering for some reason. So the vehicle is now about 207 meters away.
And Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop to confirm cameras are external.
Freedom copies, cameras are external.
So that was SpaceX Core, which you see there. Also, moments.
Freedom departs the keep out ellipsoid. I want to just thank the space station program and all of our international partners for the incredible training and on-orbit support. It's been an incredible 6 months, and we're looking forward to getting home to our families. Thanks so much.
Sounded like some nice words there from Commander Kjell Lindgren.
Freedom, we appreciate those kind words. We will miss you, and we look forward to seeing you back home. And ISS, the Dragon has exited the keep-out sphere.
As you just heard there, we just got word that Dragon exited the keep-out sphere. As Sandra mentioned, it's an imaginary boundary around the station. The next event that we are standing by for is for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid. I just want to mention real quick that view on screen there is SpaceX Mission Control, which is just to the left of Sandra and I. That's where SpaceX Core or Crew Operations and Resources Engineer Jake Vendel is standing by. That is the primary voice that you hear communicating to the crew, at least whenever they are speaking to Mission Control here in Hawthorne. We also also, of course, have Mission Control Houston over at NASA's Johnson Space Center, and that was the voice that we heard just moments ago of Chell speaking to. And there's that live view of Johnson Space Center Mission Control now. So both teams are integrated and working together and communicating with station and with crew as we have their departure, their departure now confirmed, and they are now making their way further and further away from the station. Now, as I mentioned before, as we are waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, or AE, as you hear it referred to, another imaginary shape that we have. This time, it's a three-dimensional ellipsoid, which measures 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, and that's in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. That means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all of its maneuvering capability. So we will be listening in for that call out once we hear confirmation that Dragon is outside that approach ellipsoid, or AE. And that's a live view from the station looking at Dragon Freedom.
And so at this time, Crew Dragon Freedom is 378 meters away from the International Space Station. So we are standing by for confirmation that we have exited the approach ellipsoid. We are expecting that about 5-6 minutes from now. So we are getting closer. But as you mentioned, we can continue to see Dragon get smaller as in this view from the International Space Station. Again, there are 4 crew members inside Crew Dragon Freedom. That includes NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, and Jessica Watkins, as well as European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. They have been on board the International Space Station for 170 days now, after they launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on April 27th.
As I mentioned earlier in the webcast, at this point, I would imagine that the astronauts are excited to come home. It has been nearly 6 months since they've seen their families, but I would also imagine that this moment is pretty bittersweet. They have done they've worked really hard while on station. They've done lots and lots of science. Sandra mentioned that they have, what was the number that you had earlier? It was thousands of orbits. I can't remember quite what it was off the top of my head, but they have traveled so far during their 6-month stay up on station, and it's their home away from home at this point. So I'm sure they're very much looking forward to getting back to their families here on Earth. But I'm sure that, the next basically 5.5 hours are bittersweet because it's their last visit. And there we actually, if you look at the Dragon capsule there, we can actually see the thrusting in action of those Draco thrusters that we were mentioning before. That's what Dragon is using to maneuver away from the space station.
And all of that is done autonomously, as we've mentioned several times in the broadcast. But just to jump back to your point on the numbers, so they, again, have been on board station for 170 days. They've orbited the Earth 2,700...
Freedom, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. Comm check on the cabin mic came through. How us?
So that was just a quick comm check. Now that the crew members are doffing or taking off their spacesuits, they no longer have that in-air communication because their helmets are off, so they're going to be using the in-cabin microphone to communicate with ground teams.
SpaceX, Freedom has you loud and clear on the Dragon to ground.
Copy all. Good to hear you on Dragon to ground.
So we are standing by for confirmation that the crew has exited the approach ellipsoid. We're expecting that to happen about 5 minutes from now. And again, this is an imaginary shape around the space station that is 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 4 kilometers. And any spacecraft that enter into this imaginary shape have to be in a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which just means the spacecraft would not cross into that approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, even if it lost all of its maneuvering for some reason. So we are continuing to stand by for confirmation that we've exited that approach ellipsoid about 4 minutes from now. But I did just want to finish up on the numbers here because it's really pretty staggering when you think about it. So the crew has orbited the Earth 2,720 times during their 170 days on orbit. The International Space Station is traveling 17,500 miles per hour, which means that the crew orbits the Earth every 90 minutes and sees a sunset and a sunrise every 45 minutes. So that equates to over 72 million miles traveled in the last 6-ish months that they've been on board.
That's pretty wild. Once again, that's a live view from the International Space Station looking at Crew Dragon Freedom with our 4 Crew-4 astronauts on board. They have gotten out of their seats. They are doffing or taking off their suits, and they're able to basically hang out for a couple hours before they have to put their suits back on for the re-entry phase of their return home. Now this view, because the sun is shining on it and Dragon is getting further and further away from the station, it's hard to make out the specific features, but the nose cone at this point is still open. That won't close until a little bit later on when we are closer to the re-entry portion. The trunk is also still attached. That is a portion that we will jettison from the capsule in order to expose the heat shield, which will be utilized. That heat shield will be utilized for that atmospheric re-entry.
We're about 3 minutes away from the point at which we will exit the approach ellipsoid, but continuing to hear good call-outs that everything is proceeding as expected today. We are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville later this afternoon. That splashdown is targeted for 1:55 p.m. Pacific time. And we also did hear that the boat is already out there in place in preparation for Crew-4 to splash down. The boat that's being utilized today is Megan, after Crew-2 astronaut Megan MacArthur.
Just as a reminder for those tuning in recently, the Dragon Freedom spacecraft has separated from the International Space Station. In total, it will be completing 4 departure burns, basically all designed to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. And then once that is complete, as Sandra just mentioned, we'll begin that re-entry portion. In total, the astronauts will have about 5.5 hours between undocking and splashdown. So relatively speaking, a pretty short journey back to Earth.
Dragon is now 860 meters away from space station, and you can see in this view here from the International Space Station that Dragon is continuing to get smaller and smaller as it backs away from the space station, expecting the call out that we've exited the approach ellipsoid in about a minute from now. So we are waiting for that call out that Dragon is outside of the approach ellipsoid. And everything has been moving along pretty smoothly so far today. We are just waiting for that call out here any moment from now that the crew has exited the approach ellipsoid. They are about 980 meters away from the space station.
As we mentioned earlier, everything is carefully choreographed, both approaching and departing the space station. Fortunately for us, because it has been a long few days, I should say, the departure phase is a lot faster moving than the approach. So we are able to, basically the crew, as I mentioned before, will only have about 5.5 hours between the undocking and the splashdown of their spacecraft. And all in all, that's a pretty short journey. Of course, we are at the mercy of orbital mechanics, so it all depends on where the station is and where we are targeting a splashdown, and basically the time that it takes to get from that point to the splashdown point. Of course, I would imagine the astronauts might prefer a shorter trip home because, again, they get to see their families sooner, but it all kind of depends. So for those that have tuned in for our departure and splashdown webcasts previously, sometimes they're a little longer, but this one is only about 5.5 hours in total for this journey.
And we are hearing confirmation that Crew-4 has exited the approach ellipsoid. That was the next major milestone that we were looking towards.
It is on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory.
There on your screen is SpaceX core Jake Vendel.
And Freedom, SpaceX, repeating my last. Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory.
And SpaceX Freedom copies out of the approach ellipsoid and 24-hour free drift. Thanks.
Good words.
And Dragon Freedom has now exited the approach ellipsoid, or AE, which is another imaginary shape, this time a three-dimensional ellipsoid that measures 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, in the same family as the keep-out sphere. One of the key differences with the AE is that vehicles outside it have to be on what we call So again, one of those key differences.
And Freedom, SpaceX, one more note, we are going to take down the big loop shortly.
So again, Dragon has now exited the approach ellipsoid, and as I was saying, one of those key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory.
Say again, Les.
Hey, Chell, just one more follow-on. We are deactivating the big loop imminently.
Okay, copy. Deactivating the big loop. Thanks.
And so you did hear those words back and forth from the ground here in Hawthorne to the crew on Freedom, namely the commander, Kjell Lindgren, just letting them know that the big loop is going to be deactivated, and that happens because once we cross out of the approach ellipsoid, we're no longer in integrated operations with NASA and SpaceX. So now that we're out of the approach ellipsoid, they were just letting the crew know that that was the case. So again, we have exited the approach ellipsoid, so this means the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours if it lost all maneuvering, because it is in that 24-hour safe free drift trajectory.
And now that NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, and Jessica Watkins, as well as European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, have departed the International Space Station, it will take them about 5.5 hours until they make their way back to Earth. Next up, the crew will doff, or excuse me, they already have doffed or taken off their spacesuits to settle in for their flight home. And today, Dragon is targeting a splashdown off of the coast. You see our recovery vessel there. It'll be splashing down off the coast of Florida at 1:55 p.m. Pacific, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by that recovery vessel that you just saw. And as they rest up, our teams here in Hawthorne will continue to keep an eye on the weather to ensure a safe return to Earth for Dragon and our 4 Crew-4 astronauts.
And though our coverage here in Hawthorne is concluding for now, we'll turn it over to the NASA team in Houston to take us through the next phases of the Crew-4 mission. NASA TV will stay on the air for continuous live coverage along Crew-4's journey home. And for those of you watching online on NASA's YouTube, take a look at the description below the video. There you'll be able to find the new link for the Crew-4 coast phase. Live coverage will continue at that new location here shortly. And if you're watching on NASA TV, you won't notice a change whatsoever as coverage will continue.
Meanwhile, SpaceX's YouTube channel will join live coverage starting roughly 1 hour prior to splashdown. And as always, you can find mission updates on Twitter at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov. Thanks for watching this morning, and we'll see you soon for Splashdown.